You're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast, brought to you by DraftKings, America's #1 sportsbook app. Joined by John Schuster, Ben White. I am merely Mike Luke. All right, just got back from the Tap and Bottle watch party. Thank you for everybody that showed up there. But this was a very dispirited performance, I think, for Arizona. We're going to talk a little bit about Oregon. John Schuster has been warning people about this for a while, but guys. Just watching it on TV, this game appeared to me that Arizona lacks some dynamic athleticism, for lack of a better term. There, they just looked kind of. Again, they weren't very impressive, Schuster. Like, in last year's team had guys like Ben Mathurin, Dalen, some call him Dallin, Terry, Christian Coloco. That was missing, and that's been missing in games that Arizona's lost this year against Oregon, against Washington State, etc.
Well, and I don't want to say this is fool's gold. There's a lot of seasons still to be played. But I found it kind of fascinating that up until this point, and up until this point is probably the last 3 weeks, when once we got into the second half of the ASU game, what Arizona has been and how they've been scouted has been very different. That the Mathurin Terry Coloco thing never really seemed to be an issue. It's like, wow, Arizona just keeps cranking along here and everything's going real well. And, now teams have figured out some of the approaches, and they have to have personnel as well. As you can tell from 2 nights ago, Arizona pretty much dominated Oregon State. So there are still teams out there that don't match particularly well. And when that happens, Arizona can be very effective and do a lot of things. But there are, for whatever reason, a fair amount of teams in this league, Washington, and they don't necessarily even have good overall records, ASU exempted here. Washington State, ASU, Oregon, whose ASU's overall record is good. The rest of them are not, and wouldn't get into the NCAA tournament as of today. But right now, they have matchups that certainly exploit what you're talking about, Mike. The lack of something that inevitably figured to be an issue for Arizona, because when you lose 3 players who get drafted, trying to replace that is just not an automatic thing. And Arizona's going through a pocket right now that is obviously a struggle. And when you start a show saying something to the effect of Larson disappeared, Kriisa was completely out of position, Ramey was woefully inconsistent, and Ballo couldn't hold up his end on the inside, you have a pretty good idea that things didn't go well for Arizona today. I think to a large degree, this is the game we feared. That we feared probably at the beginning of the year, that this is the type of thing that maybe could happen, and these were the types of games that Arizona could be exploited. And certainly today, that was the case. Now it becomes a question, as we dissect what happened here, as what is it that Arizona can do moving ahead to try to rectify some of this stuff?
Yeah, I thought it was one of the first few losses on the year where you saw Arizona match up against Oregon, and you just felt like from the get-go, even going in to later in the first half into that second half, that Arizona just wasn't going to find a way to recover. I think we watched stretches against Oregon State and some of these other opponents where the opponent would go on a little bit of a run, but Arizona just wasn't in it matchup-wise tonight. And I think that starts in the front court. I mean, Ballo got absolutely dominated by Dante in the front court by Oregon. And it's going to be one of those things where, Arizona's going to play more athletic teams, more fast teams as we go on in conference play. And like Schuster said, with everything we've seen the last 4 or 5 weeks, it's like all those issues just kind of came to fruition today. And how is Arizona going to respond? And it wasn't good, certainly.
Ben, you mentioned Dante, and I think that to me, there's a little bit of a difference here. And we saw that with Oregon and against Arizona's bigs. Tubelis, was fine, but Dante is going to be the type of guy that's going to give Arizona problems all season, because you just see a difference. And again, Oumar Ballo is a very, very good player. There's no doubt about it. But there's just a difference with the way that Dante moves, with the way that his length, the way that he's able to cause problems. And that's going to be something that against length, I hate to be, keep beating this dead horse, but against length, Arizona's going to have problems because they don't have explosive finishers. Last year, you had explosive finishers. You had length. This year, you don't really have that. And again, if Arizona's not dominating in the front court, they're going to have problems, Schuster, and that's certainly occurred. Today.
Well, that's one of the issues, and there's a lot to potentially dissect in that. And let's start with how Oregon is made up and how Washington State is made up, and to a lesser degree ASU, and Utah. Those guys have one center who's very good, and then complementary players that work. And what Arizona is doing in its half, and what that does is that it half negates Arizona's advantage on the inside. And teams have effectively been able to exploit Ballo a bit better than Tubelis. What we talked about a lot throughout the season, based on the way he played last year, was Tubelis going to be physical enough to hold up against the pressure when things got difficult? I think the answer to that is yes. Tubelis is the best player on this team. But the secondary question that comes into that is that to some degree, it's now Ballo who has taken over the Tubelis role from last year. And where Arizona has an advantage, and it still has a distinct advantage on the inside, again, because it has two guys who can generally consistently score on the interior. But in games like this, and the other ones as well, Vesar is not advanced enough, and Anderson certainly isn't at a point where they can make up the difference if a guy like Ballo's having an off day, or if somebody like Tubelis perhaps gets into foul trouble. What's happening in the half court, I think, with Arizona is that, and this goes back to a lot of, this is a feed the beast mentality, and now Arizona has to kind of revert to it. The Wildcats' approach throughout much of their success was force it on the inside. Get it into Tubelis, get it into Ballo, see if they can pass between each other very well, take advantage of their strength on the interior. Unfortunately, what I think has happened lately is that because Arizona has done that, you see a stagnant team on the perimeter.
Yeah,
a stagnant team that has largely lost its confidence because the game plan has been, and it's understandable, but maybe they've done it a little too much and they've become too predictable. Arizona is going to open the game throwing a pass on the interior to Tubelis or to Ballo, and those two people are going to try to go one-on-one, and then you're going to watch Kriisa, Ramey, Larson sort of stand around on the perimeter to see if how effective they ultimately are and get back on half court on the other side to try to play a little bit of defense. It doesn't feel to me, and we understand the generality that Arizona has distinct advantages on the inside, but you have to be competent on the perimeter to put yourself in a position where you can be as successful as Arizona was in the earlier portion of this campaign. And it looks to me like the desire to just hammer it on the inside consistently to try to set something up has maybe caused Arizona to regress on the outside and up and down the line. And I know that we'll be picking on Larson and we'll be picking on Kriisa and insert name of perimeter player here. The reality is that those guys are inconsistent right now and they're not helping Arizona overall.
Yeah. And I think another
Ben Schuster, I think Sean, Go ahead, Ben. My bad.
Go ahead, Mike. No, I just think another thing too is when you
you go.
I think another thing too, going back to the guard point and going back a little bit deeper on the Ballo thing is a lot of people didn't realize. I know we've paid attention to Oregon a little bit this season, but Dante's a guy who's played 4 years in the Pac-12. I mean, Ballo truly is younger. He's somebody who's in his starting role for the first time this year, and when you're going up against that experience, that athleticism, it's going to be tough. And I think it goes back to the bigger point on the guard too, where you look at a lot of these younger guys, you look at Kriisa who's come back. Is there anything particularly well that any of these guys do right now? And I think the answer is no. I mean, you've got a bunch of C-, C+ guys at best on most days because like Schuster said, you're feeding it inside. That's, 85% of where your offense is going to come from. So it can become stagnant for the guards where they aren't getting that experience. They aren't getting that consistency that you would get maybe if the team was a little bit constructed differently. I think looking across what Lloyd's saying and some of the other players after the game, Lloyd was asked simply like what needs to be better. And his answer was, according to a couple of folks on Twitter, is we need our guards playing better. downhill, better passing, better shooting. That was the quote from Tommy Lloyd, and I think that's very important.
All right, Sean makes a great point here that I'm curious about both your guys' take on this, and we've already got well over 100 comments. We're going to get to all of these, I promise. But for two things, Four Peaks. You might say to yourself, Mike, I don't want to hear about the Four Peaks. I'm not going to talk about the Four Peaks, the U of A big men. We're talking about Four Peaks Brew, which I consumed one today at the Tap and Bottle Launch Party. Check out Four Peaks Brewery, the official brew of PHNX Sports. You can go to their their Phoenix location, or you can get Four Peaks at our Tap and Bottle watch parties, which we had a lot of people show. By the way, Anthony Humbert requests John Schuster. He wants to meet John, and Kobe Thiel wants to meet John Schuster. So Schuster has people that want to see him. That's it called a segue.
It's not that exciting, but thank you.
Yes.
It would be a pleasure to meet you guys as well.
Four Peaks, check it out. Show notes and link in the description. Enjoy responsibly, and the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Code word PHNX.
Also, just so folks are aware out there, I'm bald in public too.
Here's the deal. You can put down
that's not a green screen?
Right up here.
Yeah. You can put $5 on any game, and you can, or any NBA game, if you're a new customer, get up to $200 in free plays. That's simple, that easy. 21 and up, Arizona only. Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. But again, check it out. DraftKings Sportsbook app, all kinds of good stuff. Check show note and the link in the description. All right. Sean makes a great point here that how can this team kill at Maui, womp Indiana, out-battle a really good Tennessee team, but can't compete in our own conference? The fact that we haven't won in Oregon since 2015 is disturbing. And we've been talking about this a lot, Schuster. Is this a team that just plays to its level of competition? What do you guys attribute this massive gap, to be quite frank, about how you can? Yeah, go ahead.
It's more difficult to play teams, generally speaking, in your conference because conference teams know how to scout you. There was something that Dana Altman told the ESPN broadcasters today, that one of his keys to the game was if you can keep Arizona in the 60s and limit their transition, you're going to be successful. Here's one of them, and in the early portion of the season, Arizona was very good, especially with a guy like Tubelis, to get down the floor and get easy baskets. We talked about that a lot, how well Tubelis runs the floor. Tubelis is still running the floor, but teams are aware of him getting down the floor, and they're making it more difficult for Arizona to score in transition where they need to get easy buckets. That is the singular reason that Arizona is a 88-point scoring team and now a 68-point scoring team. The Cats are in the bottom half of the country in forcing steals. And this is the major difference between last year's Arizona team. I think in generalities, obviously, you had an individual in Matherin who could score like crazy, but you have a couple differences on the defensive side. Arizona is very much, despite their lofty scoring numbers early, a half-court basketball team. And that means that when they try to run off defensive rebounds, and that's it. Last year, they could run off Coloco block shots, or they could run off steals on the perimeter.
Yeah.
And when you have those two scenarios, Arizona's deadly in transition. This Arizona team is deadly in transition too, but it's much more difficult for them to get into transition. So I think something that Arizona really needs to look at here is deciding whether they want to press a little bit more and go deeper on the bench. You bring in guys like Henderson, guys who haven't even seen the floor like ball, guys like Ramey,
Boswell.
Exactly. The more athletic people, and I think even a guy like Larson could benefit from something like this. You can't do this the entire game because it wears you out. But I think Arizona needs to seriously consider doing it a lot more to try to get themselves into some sort of rhythm that allows them to get easy buckets in the open floor. Look at some of their competitors in the last two games that we've talked a lot about. In the second half, when ASU came back against Arizona, how did they do it? By forcing steals in the backcourt or on the perimeter and getting easy dunks at the rim. What happened in the Oregon game today? Oregon was dunking with regularity, largely because Arizona was turning the ball over in the first half, and it allowed them to open a lead and then get confidence. So I think if you were looking for one significant tweak from Arizona, the Cats have to look seriously about going deeper on the bench and trying to be a lot more forceful as far as not just settling for a half-court man-to-man offense, trying to open things up a little bit and causing a little bit more havoc to see if that jumpstarts the offense.
And I think too, when you have a young team like Arizona, I think a lot of that transpires back to effort too. And if we are in a situation where Arizona is able to do those things, force steals, force turnovers, get the ball in transition and get the bigs going early, that's going to be your blueprint for success. And Schuster's exactly right. ASU was that blueprint for how to beat Arizona. Teams didn't quite understand what they were going up against early in the season. We've seen, fluky games all throughout college basketball. Kentucky, who's been god-awful, beat Tennessee today. So I think the flukiness is here to stay, and it's going to continue. But as time goes on and as you get into conference play, it's going to be easier. It's going to be a lot easier. And Arizona has to find a way to get back to what their identity was, like we talked about. And then furthermore, they have to be able to put it together for 40 minutes. This team is very on-off. If there's not a strong effort from the get-go, there's obviously a deficit that we've seen that follows. And when you play a team like Oregon that just matches up so athletically, especially in the front court, and we haven't even gotten to their guard play with Will Richardson today. But when you look at the matchups, you look at the game-by-game case basis, it's only going to get harder for Arizona. UCLA is a really athletic team. Some of these other teams in the Pac-12 and some of these other teams you're going to see in Vegas are really, really athletic, despite what their win-loss record shows. So Arizona has to get back to doing what their identity is, which is being a defensive team first, forcing steals, forcing turnovers, winning that physicality battle, because the last 3 or 4 games, say what you want, Oregon State, Washington State, even going back to the Utah loss, what has been the common denominator? Arizona just hasn't been the most physical team on the court. And I think what's really alarming for most people is you saw that today, especially with Ballo in the front court, that you haven't seen all year. And that's when we start having some problems to say, hey, what's going on here? What needs to change?
Something that Tommy Lloyd said, and I think it's a great point you made there, Ben, amongst many great points that Ben White makes. But Tommy Lloyd said, the guards need to get downhill. I don't know that they're capable of getting downhill. And that's not, meant to be a slight or anything. But these are guys that Kerr Kriisa can do some really good things out there. Kerr Kriisa is limited athletically. Kerr Kriisa is not going to get down a hill. Pelle Larsson isn't going to get down a hill. Those are, that's not how athletically, that's not how they're built. That's not how they're set up. So that to me is more of a physical limitation aspect than anything else. So he's looking for, they're looking for things that, or the Tommy Lloyd's asking for things that I don't know that they're physically capable of doing, Shu.
Well, okay. Are you talking about going downhill in the half court? Then
well, no, he's
yes. Are you talking about going downhill by forcing turnovers and trying to make things happen?
He's talking about, in my opinion, I could be totally wrong here, but I think he's talking about being able to force the issue, get past your guy, be able to, exert yourself against the defense that you're going against. That to me is what he means.
Okay. And in the half court, which Arizona, again, plays most of its games this year in the half court, and certainly has played that way in the last 3 weeks. And basketball as a whole is a half court game. So in those situations, being able to defeat your player off the dribble is a problem that Arizona has, which means one of the things that Arizona did well earlier this year is that they have guys who can pass the ball. So you have to be good, not necessarily about getting past your guy, but being able to cut well without the basketball and creating havoc that way. And that is something that Arizona seems to have forgotten. There seems to be a stagnant nature on the offensive end, which can't happen, whether it be because this is a team that has to get some easy looks, and they've become obviously a lot more difficult. Now, is that how they're scouted? Perhaps. Is that an athletic limitation? Perhaps. Is it a lack of confidence? Sure. Might be all of those things, but it's something that, among other things, needs to get rectified. And it's going to be interesting to watch what it is the coaching staff does to try to create a little bit of a spark here. Because what you're talking about, I think, to some degree with the guards is if you have the way it's supposed to work is that you pound the ball on the inside, teams decide they're going to double Tubelis or they're going to double Ballo. What Tubelis or Ballo are supposed to do is either kick it out to the other, find the other big guy open, or find a guy who's then open as a result. You move the ball around a little bit. Maybe you got somebody cutting to the basket. You get an easy look. You put half-court pressure on somebody as a result of a team's intention to double-team a better player on the interior. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And again, one of the reasons I think it is that you have a lot of guys sort of standing around. And you're going to have to get some motion on that. And it's weird because this is the thing that Arizona was known for. Arizona is known as a motion team that passes the ball a lot and gets itself easy looks as a result because they're unselfish. But now it looks like their approach has been feed Tubelis and watch, or feed Ballo and watch. And Arizona needs more participants, especially on the perimeter.
Yeah, Ben, Kobe Thiel, I think, makes an interesting point as well, where he said with the backcourt especially, that's kind of where I think a lot of the ire is going to be. But again, this was a team collapse right here. But it doesn't feel that there's no you just shoot. If they're not making threes offensively, there's not a lot that they're doing out there. And I think that's something that has reared its head time and again. I'll use an example here, and I'm not saying that Will Richardson is Allen Iverson, but Will Richardson in that game, the Oregon point guard, was able to control the pace. He was, again, not a great athlete, but he was able to get where he wanted on the court. He was able to control the tempo. That's something that Arizona, at least so far, hasn't demonstrated this year as far as having somebody like that.
No, and Arizona's been thrown some defensive challenges going back to the last couple of weeks now, starting with ASU, that they just haven't seen all year. And when we look back at Arizona's dominant performances this year, whether it was a really good team or even if it was a team like Tennessee, a team like IU that was good at the time, what do? They score 80 to 85 points a game. They force a bunch of steals. They force a bunch of turnovers. And how does that start? That starts with your guards. And that just hasn't happened because these teams right now that Arizona's seeing, they're trying to slow down the pace, make them play in the half court, try to win the matchup one-on-ones, and Arizona's doomed. Arizona can't win a game, 65 to 60. They're just not capable of it. They don't have the physicality. They don't have the guard play or the skill yet. There's a lack of athleticism from some guys. And I think what's really hurting them is I think you expected somebody like Kriisa to take a little bit of a bigger step, at least from the three-point line or from the three-point shot. You just haven't seen that this year. There just hasn't been that one consistent shooter on the team where we talk about a guy can, take over for one thing. We've talked about who's that explosive wing, that athletic guy who's going to take over when this team needs it the most. I think that's a little bit of a stretch now to ask. We just need somebody who can step up and make shots. And right now, I don't know who that guy is. I mean, it was Ramey for 2 threes to start the second half, but after that, it was a careless turnover and fouling a three-point shot, and everything went downhill from there. So I think Arizona's guards are really hurting them more so than anything right now.
Janet L.
Go ahead.
Janet L., somebody who I know very, very well, who actually gave birth to me, is from this era, was born and raised in Crete, Nebraska, where Dana Altman's from. But Dana Altman was raised in Wilbur, Nebraska, so she's calling him the Wilbur Wizard. That
is
actually
there a joke behind Crete, Nebraska, something like that?
There is a joke, but there's a time and a place, and I'm probably not going to say it right now.
Is there a joke behind Wilbur, Nebraska?
No, not really. Wilbur's the sister city of Crete. So again, a little too much inside info right there. But yeah, I mean this team is, and I had somebody ask me about this shoe for historical reference, and I think that this is a question for you. Does this team remind you a little bit of those Olsen teams, the Tucson Skyline, in that
yes,
you got good bigs, but you're kind of
precisely this, and the entirety of the early Tommy Lloyd tenure feels eerily like what Arizona was in the early era of Olsen. Other than Olsen obviously had to build from scratch. Took him 4 years to do it, and then they had the big jump onto the stage. But start there. Basically, what Lloyd did, other than the Final Four, was Arizona in '88. Came out of nowhere, played over their heads, got a number 1 seed, kicked the hell out of teams for the most part, and had a ridiculous season. Probably better than they should have. Then, this year, they became a November basketball team that advanced faster than everybody else. Sound a little bit like the late 80s, early 90s Arizona teams under Olsen? Kinda. And then, talent sort of levels things off a little bit. Arizona goes into a bit of a slump, but they win enough games to still get a very favorable seed. And then you don't necessarily like what the results are in the NCAA tournament until Arizona picked things up on the wings and in the perimeter and started to increase its talent. That's increase its athleticism in addition to talent. And that's one of the things that you can argue, certainly based on the last couple of weeks, that maybe that's something that Arizona is seeing as well. It's not necessarily that we were surprised by this. We've been concerned all year about what Arizona was going to do without Mathurin, without Terry, without Koloko. And Arizona did exceptionally up until about 3 weeks ago. And now teams have been able to scout them. They've got some material. They understand how to approach them. And they know that Tubelis is the best player on the floor. And so they figure he's going to get his points, but maybe nobody else is. And if you can keep Arizona in the half court, you can limit their offensive effectiveness and you make them beat you from the perimeter. And right now, Arizona is a team perimeter-wise that has no confidence whatsoever. And one of the things that I think is, concerning is that you have a lot of guys, a lot of folks on the comments saying, hand the reins to Boswell. If you hand the reins to Boswell right now, you're basically saying this year's done. And it's not that Boswell isn't going to be the future of this program and a really good backcourt player, but he plays like a 17-year-old, which is, right. He plays like a really talented 17-year-old that has a lot of learning to do. And there are moments where you see him and you say, yeah, that guy's got some skills. And then 3 consecutive possessions, he puts himself in bad spots on the floor and pretty much negates any effectiveness Arizona might have on the offensive end. It's understandable, but he's not advanced enough right now to be a next guy up type of performer. Look at Ramey. Ben talked to me. What Ben just mentioned, I think, is one of the most significant sequences of the game and the issue that Arizona has up and down its roster right now. Ramey comes out and drills 2 3-pointers out of the gate, and then you have a tie game. And then they get a possession again, and Ramey takes a terrible 3 because he's made the last 2. The first 2 he made in flow. In the third one, he rushed it. And then, as Ben noted, he gets called for, fouling the 3-point shooter on another possession, throws a bad pass on the baseline, and all of a sudden, all the goodwill that he does, 2 good possessions, 3 bad possessions. That's the kind of inconsistency that he's had. And then beyond it, defensively, he was absolutely dominated by Oregon's backcourt for most of this game. Kriisa was completely out of his element today, and Larson has become the invisible man. You look at a guy like Henderson. When's the last time we said a word from a positive or negative standpoint about Henderson? So there are things there. The problem with Arizona is that I think their backcourt is, when things are going well, pretty good. And if they can hit relatively consistently from 3-point range, their inside game is so good that pretty good can keep you into games and win a lot of them. But they're going to have to figure out, I believe, a way to force turnovers to get themselves cheap buckets just to start to feel more comfortable about what it is they want to do. And those have been largely negated by more athletic teams over the last 3 weeks. Athletic teams who understand what it is that Arizona does well and is being effective in stopping it. And now we're at the point of the season where Arizona has to make its own adjustments to try to improve.
Okay, let's talk about first, real quick, Tap and Bottle. Great watch party show out today. We had people that wanted to see John Schuster. That means that John Schuster is going to come to one of these at some point. He'll be signing autographs, pressing the flesh, hanging out with the kids, all of that stuff. But Tap and Bottle, check it out. Watch parties are fantastic. My guy Matthew Bothwell in there. Really appreciate all of you showing up. And you can get Four Peaks Brew there as well. Tap and Bottle downtown. Check it out. Scott and Rebecca do a great job. And Illegal Pete's. All right. Now, anybody that's been in college in Arizona knows about Illegal Pete's because it's at university and it's at the lesser school up in Tempe as well. There's an Illegal Pete's as well. Check it out.
Colorado too.
Is there Illegal Pete's in Colorado?
Where it started, yeah.
I did not know that. All right, but good food. I've seen Ben White go in there in the past, schmooze with some females, get some drinks, get some good food. But again,
it's the other way around. The schmoozing is going the other way.
The females are schmoozing with them. That is a great point. Check out the show notes, though. Again, great food, great drinks, great deals. You got it. Illegal Pete's as well. There's also another thing too where. And I can't find the comment here, but there's also no middle ground with this team on the perimeter in that it's either, like I said, it's a 3, but nobody drives. Like last year, I mean, every good Arizona team, even Miller teams, had guys that could get to the hoop, that could force, that could stress a defense. Arizona doesn't have that. Kriisa is not a guy that gets to the hoop. He doesn't really have the floater. Larson can finish around the hoop, but his stuff's all off cuts. It's not off drives. Ramey is strictly pretty much a three-point shooter. Like you said, Shu, it looked like Cedric Henderson earlier in the year had that possibility to it, but we haven't seen that. Ben, this is a team that when you don't have anybody that can stress a defense like that, you're going to have games like this.
And I think, too, where you're an Arizona fan, what really concerns you, just how many names did you just name right there? I mean, Arizona's gone through everybody in the rotation. The guard play is wide open. They've gone deep on the bench. We've talked about that for good or bad in some of these games where maybe they had a little bit more control, getting guys like Ramey, getting guys like Henderson, Boswell, etc. in the game. And nobody's kind of been able to break away and step up. And I know we've got some time, but I thought, too, the difference today where, you talk about three-point shots and outside shots, what do? You keep shooting. Arizona took a lot of bad shots today. They weren't really particularly good looks. They were a lot of forced shots, and it felt like Arizona, once they got down, 8-10, and it was eventually a double-digit game, there were just a lot of rushed offensive possessions. I understand this team wants to play at a high tempo, and that's where they do best, but it's got to start on the defensive end if you're going to do that. You've got to be forcing some turnovers. You've got to be getting some clean, clear looks in the inside and outside, and they don't play what has set them up for success all throughout, the first half of the season. It's just, they get slowed down in the half court. Athleticism becomes a problem. And I feel like we're having the same conversation here, over the last 2 or 3 games, but this was inevitable. And it's how Arizona responds now. Is there going to be a guy who steps up? I think eventually on the guard side, you're going to have somebody play a little bit better. Kriisa, I would hope, is that guy, but again, there's limitations with him. Bottom line is, it's really hard to replace a lottery pick like Mathurin, and it's really hard to replace 3 guys altogether, 2 of them who went to the NBA, and that's something that I think we keep forgetting about. Arizona lost 2 really, really good players, and the team that they have now is really, really young and green, so that's something that we have to consider as well.
Do you think that, honestly, because before the season, and we talked about this a great deal, that I didn't believe that they were a national title contender. I thought they were somewhere between probably about 15 to 25, something like that. Then they come out and, you get these great wins. You look fantastic in Maui, and then we start recalibrating it. But maybe this is also them coming back to kind of their median right here. And that, yes, it's a team, but it's a vulnerable team, and it's probably more suited to be somewhere between 15 to 25, something like that, as opposed to battling for a 1 or a 2 seed. You look more like a 4 or a 5 seed, Shu.
Generally speaking, when they were ranked 17th at the beginning of the year, I thought that was a fair ranking and thought at the end of the year they'd be better than that. Whatever your interpretation of, I guess your interpretation of better is, are they a 1 or 4 seed? That they'd be somewhere in that 3 or 4 range, and I still think there's a very good chance that's going to happen. As the season has moved along in the early stages, consider the advancement of Ballo made Arizona significantly better than we expected right out of the gate. But now Ballo is leveled off a little bit. And I think there are probably a variety of reasons that go into that. It's still possible that he isn't feeling his best, although he looked really good in the Oregon State game. But are you able, as a guy who played 14 minutes a game last year, are you able to string together consecutive 28 to 30-minute games at this stage, 2 nights out of 3? I don't know. He was absolutely dominated tonight. And in the games that Arizona has struggled, Ballo has kind of plateaued at the moment and needs to work through the plateauing a little bit. And hopefully that is something that will happen. He was instrumental in Arizona being good because he gave Arizona that distinct advantage that we have often talked about. The backcourt has regressed a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think there's still an opportunity. There are still things that Arizona can do on the offensive end that are fairly simple, that even fall under the category of Arizona tenets, but they're just not, for a variety of reasons, particularly comfortable and consistent enough to make that happen. You have guys who aren't great 3-point shooters, but they need to be consistent, need to be able to keep you honest. And right now, up and down the line, you have none of those guys. You have a guy in Kriisa who, bless his heart, plays.
Anytime somebody says bless his heart, you're about
to. but hasn't been consistent. You need to be able to string some threes together or something to open up the floor. And he's obvious, his shooting is a heck of a lot more Mike and Ben like it was last year than what we saw in the 2 months of the season where he made some pretty good improvements. Ramey continues to be baffling to me. And it seems like he's trying to climb a mountain with an oil slick. So every time he tries to get up and make some progress, he's going to take a bad step and slip back a little bit, and then he becomes frustrating and sort of a net, level limitation. Larson has become the invisible man, and Larson needs to change his discipline. He needs to quit.
Also, what do you mean?
He needs to quit being a history major. It doesn't matter what Larson just did. It's what Larson needs to do next. It looks to me like he thinks too much. When Larson makes a mistake, everything compounds itself or he completely disappears. And whereas if you look at Kriisa from a personality standpoint, Kriisa doesn't remember or doesn't care generally. Obviously, he doesn't want to do something wrong, but he clears his head. That was history. Whether he made the 25-footer or missed 4 in a row, that was history. We're still going to do. Kirk Kriisa is going to be Kirk Kriisa. Unfortunately, what you don't want is for the current Larson to be Larson, because he needs to have that Kriisa-like personality where it's just, that's done. I can't do anything about it. Now don't compound that by making mistake 2, 3, or 4. And a lot of that is just being invisible. He has the potential. Mike, Ben, in the latter portion of Arizona's season last year, one of the discussions we had, and obviously it helps you have Matherin on the roster and Terry on the roster and so forth, but one of the discussions we had was how Larson was so deceptively athletic, and somehow he got anywhere on the floor that he wanted to. This year, that isn't happening. So there isn't a reason why that isn't happening. It just isn't. And I think it's in the noggin right now. And so there are different things that these guys kind of have to work their way through to improve. But I think there's room for that improvement to take place and Arizona to right the ship a little bit here. But, I was curious what was going to happen with Arizona on the road this week. Things looked good at Oregon State. And then the Cats got a serious reality check against a team that continues to match up with them. Well, you're going to have tough games on the schedule, and you're in a position now where you may not be able to catch up and win the conference. But you've got to start to string some games together and obviously get significantly better. And it's a question to see. And it'll be an interesting strategy from the coach's standpoint to see what it is they can do to try to take those positive steps.
All right, to all these ASU door jams that are commenting right here about Arizona State basketball, just remember this. Every good Phoenix player comes to Tucson. They're not going to ASU. ASU doesn't matter. We're happy that you're on here boosting the numbers, but you also need to remember at the same time that nobody cares about ASU revenue sports. Doesn't matter. You can have baseball or wrestling, whatever the case may be, but nobody really cares. But again, appreciate you tuning in. All right, Ben, let me tell you about More Furniture. morfurniture.com. Now you might say, Mike, what's More Furniture? Look at Ben. Ben's got a nice house out there in California. And you know what? If Ben was deciding that he wanted to get even better furniture than his A+ furniture he already has, the only place he would be able to find that is at More Furniture, morfurniture.com. Check it out. And while you're doing that, maybe you're saying to yourself, I'd like to get some good pizza. Mountain Mike's Pizza. You get that. Oracle and Wetmore. Granted, it's not in California. It would take you a long time to come to Tucson to get Mountain
Mike's. My friend. That's where you're wrong.
See, I thought it was. You mentioned this before in one of our things, and I thought Ben was going to pick up on this. I think Mountain Mike's. I think there's a bunch of Mountain Mike's locations.
There's a bunch in NorCal and there's some in SoCal. Yep.
All right. Well, I do apologize then. So morfurniture.com and Mountain Mike's. Check it out. Again, wouldn't surprise me at all if one of these times we have Ben White on here and his entire place is revamped with More Furniture and Mountain Mike's Pizza in the background.
Well, I hope, though, that if that happens, that Ben White doesn't spill the Mountain Mike's Pizza on the More Furniture.
But if but again, then there will be More Furniture, right? Hence
That's
the name,
true.
More
Furniture. I drove by More Furniture a couple days ago on the west side.
All right.
In Phoenix.
So again, this
Pretty
just
exciting
isn't.
tale.
Oh, by the way, I've had many people. I like the A sign. Thank you, Mom. My mom got me that one. I'll see what I can do there, Matthew. Good call right here. But now you got the LA schools coming up. That is going to be interesting. I will say this. It would not surprise me at all if Arizona plays really, really well against the LA schools. It's at home, obviously. You got UCLA, you got USC. UCLA is a top 5 team in the country. They're playing really well. What are we looking for? What are we looking for in that? Because again, as Tommy Lloyd said, it's a long season. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Arizona plays very well against both those teams.
That wouldn't surprise me either. But and the good news is that with students back, I think that's going to be a rowdy atmosphere. So coming into McHale is always difficult. The other thing that is helpful, the way that those schedules are laid out, earlier trolling notwithstanding, is that now going to Tempe is a difficult matchup as well. So that's not going to be an easy road swing for UCLA or USC. And if either of those teams get out of Arizona with a sweep, then the legitimacy factor of them, I think, goes up significantly. But Arizona and UCLA is very often a marquee matchup. This is going to be no exception. The Wildcats will have no problem getting up for this game, and hopefully, obviously, they can perform significantly better than they have over the course of most of the last month.
Sean, really appreciate you. Some really good points right here. I don't really see this. Is the team like the 04-05 team? The reason to me that it's not, and keep in mind, I believe that 04-05 finished second in the conference, if I'm not mistaken. So
we'll have to look back at that at some point. I feel like they had a much better year, that it was clear based on the talent in front of them that they were were getting significantly better.
And I think on top of that, there's no Salim Stoudemire on this team. There's no guy that just get out of the way and he can get you 30 points pulling up from the cactus. There's also no Hassan Adams on this team, a guy who was just that 10+ level athlete who, when he was playing his game, was one of the best players in the country. Shakur obviously wasn't very good, but that 04-05 to me would make pretty quick work of this team.
I think the better comparison that you made was the early the post 88 pre 94 Olsen teams. If you're a lover of comparison, and I don't know anybody in this broadcast right now who is a
hate
lover
comparisons.
Of comparison. So I'll just pretend there. But if you were a lover of comparisons, I think those would fit probably a little bit better.
Yeah. All right. So, guys, everybody out there, really appreciate you. Rudy Bastillo's coming in with all of the good stuff, as always. Great comments, hundreds and hundreds of comments. Appreciate you all. Again, you're the ones that make this show, and can't thank you enough. John Schuster, as always. Ben White as well. You guys are the best, and we will be back with you next week, hopefully for a better, hoping for a better outcome than the game that we got. But for Shu and Ben and everybody out there, again, appreciate you. You have been listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast.